And we're here with Conor Ryan. Conor, what is up?
Evan, doing well. How you doing?
Doing great. Doing great. This is 2 straight weeks of you back on Bruins beat. It's like we're getting back in the rhythm of you coming on.
Yeah, I know. Slowly but
It's
surely.
slowly getting you back in the loop on this. But how was your weekend?
It was swell. Watched the Super Bowl. Went with, I hope the Bengals were going to win, but
Mm-hmm.
alas, it was more realistic. It's like, Aaron Donald was going to absolutely obliterate Cincinnati's offensive line. Sure enough, it happened. Ads terrible as always, which
Yeah.
I feel like it's very much an old man gripe to be like the Super Bowl ads are bad. It's like realistic now. Like everyone's got like Twitter and like YouTube. Like these things, people are getting more creative. You don't have to like wait for the big game for like you to drop like a good ad anymore. So like I understand it comes with the territory, but it was good. No complaints. As of when the time this podcast drops, hopefully BU will be Beanpot champions.
Ooh,
If
yes,
not,
that is
we
tonight.
will scrub this audio from the podcast. So fingers crossed there. But how are you doing? How was your weekend, Evan?
It was great. I actually had to do a Beanpot preview video for the championship for the NCAA, and I predicted BU to win. Hurt me to do it.
I
But I
understand.
did.
I
I
understand.
did. I had to make a business decision, and I did it. It was a good weekend. Fun times. Super Bowl was great. You're right. The ads were terrible. The only ad that I actually remember was the crypto.com ad with the barcode that went all over the
Yes.
screen. That's the only ad I really remember.
One of like
Um,
85 crypto ads.
Yes, there were many. And I didn't know what if you're new to crypto. That's the one thing the crypto that people didn't get was like if someone's new to crypto, which is who you're targeting, how are they gonna pick a place? What's the because you made me scan a barcode and the website crashed. The website crashed within seconds.
Yes. Of course.
So it went splendid on their part. They probably spent a ton of money to get that to happen, and then the website just kind of goes kaputs. But yes, good game, interesting game. I wanted the Bengals to win, but I will get to later how I did in my bets when we talk about our good friends later in this episode. But it was a good Super Bowl. wasn't a bad one. Last year was good because Brady was so dominant in it, but like in terms of being a good
The
game, it
competition was
was
nothing.
no,
Yeah. Trash.
no.
The game
It
was
was like 30.
terrible.
It was like 31-9 last year. So this year
Something like that.
was much better in those terms. But anyways, the Bruins did not play on Super Bowl Sunday this year. Unfortunate. They played the day before a 12:30 game in Ottawa, which Jack
Riveting.
Edwards was in mid-season form for.
Yes.
Him and Brick, it was like they had drank all the coffee at the Dunkin' Donuts near the office. That had to have been
Yes.
what the case was. They were terrific. But before we get into how they've been lately, we got to address some trade deadline rumors because again, it's that time of year. See, we're in kind of the mode where we're gearing up for the trade deadline, but it's still like over a month away.
Yeah.
So we're
Way too
not
long.
that close to it. But
Yeah. 5 weeks.
5 weeks to the trade deadline. We're gonna milk the trade deadline dry for all the content we can get. But Jamie McLennan of I believe TSN mentioned the Bruins as a dark horse for Marc-Andre Fleury. Obviously, Tuukka Rask retired last week. We have both spoken at length on that on Poke the Bear, so I'm not going to spend a lot of today, or really any of today, talking about Rask because that has been done ad nauseum. But Fleury's an interesting case because now it's come down with the Bruins to Swayman and Ullmark in net. Those are the two guys going forward. And Fleury most likely is going to get dealt at this deadline, most likely. And do you see this as a fit?
I mean,
Because
could
this
it
was
help?
on no one's. This was not on our radar at all.
Yeah. I mean, could he help the team? I'm sure. But I mean, I think we've talked about this before off the podcast. Like, considering all the other vacancies in this lineup and other things we've talked about for weeks now in terms of top six, a legit, franchise center, even like Conor Garland, a guy on the wing that could help you out, top 4D, Jacob Chikrin, all these guys. If the Bruins now, along with that pretty extensive shopping list, have to add number one goalie to their list, then they shouldn't be buying anyway because that's too much. Like they already don't have enough to acquire Hurdle and Chikrin, obviously. I mean, unless you had a cupboard full of legit top prospects, you can't pull that off. But Bruins already have to get pretty selective in terms of how much they're, diverting resources to acquire at least some impact players somewhere across the lineup. If you add Fleury into that mix, who, even though he's an older player, Still's going to cost a lot. You saw how much Tyler Toffoli went for to go to Calgary.
I know,
First,
my
a
God.
first and quite a few other picks. I mean, if that's what the asking price is going to be, and I feel like that's going to be the case for any legit NHL, or even we talked a thing about Scott Mayfield before as being like a third pairing solid guy, physical player on the Islanders right now. Checks a lot of boxes about what a team that needs some added depth on defense is going to cost. He's going to cost a first round pick. Like he's
Yeah.
going and he's under contract through next year. Like all these players are going to have a pretty high asking price from the teams that are dealing them. So um, if you're the Bruins, could you use Fleury? Maybe. I mean, it's just you have to look at where the other things are. If you're giving up a first and other prospects to get Flurry, and that prevents you from getting a guy that helps you out, like a Hurdle or a Miller or anyone on defense, then you shouldn't be buying anyway. If you have that many holes to plug up to try to make a viable run in the playoffs this year, and again, it's the same situation where we've talked about it before with a guy like Claude Giroux or Pavelski or any of these older veteran guys that are pretty much pure rentals. If you're the Bruins and you're already, weighing what you want to do with this deadline, and obviously they want to contend right now, but you have to look ahead to the future. If you're giving up a first round pick and that's the asking price for all these guys, save those for the guys that are worth investing in that you can build with and bridge that gap going forward. So Bruins get out of this deadline and they get Hurdle and they use some cap gymnastics, but you sign him long term, you're all set.
Yeah,
You're
you're
good for
good.
the future too. Miller, same exact thing. Flurry, all right, you gave up a first and a legit prospect for him. Maybe you're a little bit better, but who knows? Goaltending can be a crapshoot. And you go to the second round and lose, and you give up a first round pick for a guy who's not part of your long term plans because you still have Jeremy Swayman and Linus Ullmark here. Like maybe he helps you out, but you look at just the number of other areas the Bruins need to improve in, plus the asking price, plus the fact that he's not fits in with what I think the Bruins are looking at, which is pieces that you can build for going forward. I can't really see the fit as in terms of where exactly he fits into their plans here.
And his numbers aren't even that amazing this year. This is not like Vezina Marc-Andre Fleury. This is, and granted, he's on the Blackhawks. It's a way
Yes.
worse team. Like, if that has to be discussed. But his numbers have not been great enough to be like, oh, if he comes in, they're going on a run. Now, the only positive, and I texted you this, the only reason I think you would go after a Fleury, because you said you cannot have Fleury and Miller, or Fleury and Chikrin, or Fleury and really any other, bigger than a
Legit
like
piece
a
coming
legit
back.
game changing type player. So maybe like a Scott Mayfield too, but not particularly him. The only reason you might would be that you feel that JT Miller or Chikrin wouldn't get you past a Tampa or a Florida or a Toronto. And maybe what would be incredibly hot goaltending, which in theory you would predict more hot goaltending out of Fleury given his track record than a Swayman or an Olmark. But again, that's a huge bet. And that's a
Yes.
very short-term bet. That is not a bet like, you're betting on just this spring that the final run will be Marc-Andre Fleury gets super hot and takes the, middle of the road Bruins to the Stanley Cup final.
Yeah.
And granted, Fleury's play in the playoffs the past, last year at least was sort of shaky. And so again, like, I don't see the fit either. I don't. There are way bigger holes on this team. I think if you do get a second line center like a Miller or a Hurdle, you're set not just for this year, but for potentially future years. If you want to go Chikrin, which I don't think they're going to do, but if they did, you have him for future years too. Someone like Fleury, I just don't. I don't see it. But I mean, again, I think it kind of boils down, and this is something we'll talk about down the stretch, is who's going to separate themselves as the starter on this team in the playoffs, Olmark or Swayman? And can you even go on and off? Can both those guys play
Yeah.
in the playoffs somehow? I'm not sure how you do that.
Hmm.
But maybe because they're playing like this, they get used to it. They have the hug down at least. We saw
Yes.
after the game in Ottawa, the hug is back.
The,
So
the
that is,
chemistry is good at least, but
yes.
who's going to separate themselves as number one goalie still to be determined. But I don't think it's going to be Flurry.
No, I don't think they're gonna have three goalies. Florida get on the
Yes.
hug too.
Yes.
Florida will jump over the
Hmm.
top. He's a very personable guy, so maybe it works out. But yeah, I don't see Fleury. I don't see Fleury coming here, and again, I mean, unless it took nothing, unless it was like literally like a second round pick, which is not going to be the case. I don't really support that move at all. Anyways, to the team on the ice, to the actual Bruins team, they are currently without Patrice Bergeron and Brad Marchand. Patrice Bergeron will not play tonight against New York. Might join them on the trip. Marchand will be missing game 3 of his 6-game suspension, or game 2.
Yes,
No, game 3.
game 3, and he will, per Bruce Cassidy, be in New York on Wednesday for his appeal. So
Mm,
if he somehow gets it knocked down to 3 games, maybe he's back in time for the Thursday game against the Islanders. We'll see. I still think maybe he gets a game or 2 knocked off. I don't think he's going to be playing in New York. So
no.
we will see.
Maybe in his appeal, since it's in person, he can like show the NHL like how the punch felt. He can put like a goalie
Yes,
mask on the
he
the
just
the, the
he
guy
just,
doing the
he
hearing
just
and just kind of
punches
punch like, hey,
George. Yeah,
yeah. See, George doesn't even hurt. You've
yeah.
been punched a million times, George. He gets a stick and pokes him in the
Hmm.
chest. But life without those two is not great. Not great. And the results kind of speak for themselves, right? You lose 6-0 to the Hurricanes and just a complete debacle at TD
Yes.
Garden. Fans should be asking for their money back on those tickets. And then you beat the Senators 2-0. I would say they dominated the majority of that game. Probably could have had a goal or 2 extra,
Yeah.
but still won. So a team
Professional win.
without, yeah, professional win. You got what you got. Charlie Coyle was like the best player among McAvoy as well in that game. But again, it kind of hits at this bigger thing that life without those two going forward is not great. And we mentioned this. I think it was on Poke the Bear, but a guy like Bergeron, who is mulling his future, even if he's able to come back, you wonder how at or near 100% he is in coming back. I mean, this could potentially hurt his future here too.
Yeah, no, I mean it's very dour when those two guys both aren't in there. And again, you can try to draw the silver linings out of some of these recent lineup shuffles that have looked good, like Coyle with Frederick and Smith has had some potential. The new de facto first line, which is more or less just the Eric Howell line, hasn't really clicked yet, which is a little bit concerning because you thought out of all the lines that have kind of been jumbled with both Bergeron and Marchand out, that was the one that was most assured to at least probably still produce offensively. Haven't really gotten that yet, which is a little bit concerning. But again, just in terms of the on ice production, the leadership, the stability those guys bring, just having them in the lineup every day. I mean, you see it now in terms of how impactful they are. So if you're the Bruins, uh, concerning to say the least. It should once again fuel the fact that you desperately need to upgrade that forward core. I think both not just this year, but again, a guy in the coming years. So whether that's Hurdle or any of these players, um, it's evident just how much they desperately need like another. Even if Bergeron's back next year, you need like another 1-2 punch down the middle, which. Maybe it's David Krejci. Maybe David Krejci comes back. Maybe it's maybe you acquire a guy that you have for long term. Whatever it is, you can't go into next year, especially with even if Bergeron's back, still have kind of that uncertainty of like a Howla Coil, one of those things. You still desperately miss some of that star power there. So for now, they're able to at least tread water. We'll see how they do in New York. New York, even though they're at the top of the league or one of the top teams in the Metro, a lot of it's based off of goaltending, and Sturkin's been wild, and you're going to be without your two better offensive players. So we'll see what exactly happens in that game. Um, but yeah, I mean, for years now, Bergeron and Marchand have more or less been a cheat code for them, right? In terms of you're down a goal, all it takes is one shift to switch the momentum, how good they are at the two-way game, what have you. So I think you're seeing it now. Are they doomed? Are they doomed to sell? I don't think so, but it's going to be tough sledding for how long both those guys are still out for.
Yeah, again, I mean, it's a completely different team.
Yeah.
And it's been rare that the Bruins have not had those two not on the ice together. It's been a long time. I can't even remember the last time that they were out for an extended stretch of time. And you're seeing again, like, Bergeron retires. You're so limited down the middle. And again, Marchand's not retiring or anytime soon. He's not pulling like an Aaron Donald, which the Aaron Donald stuff was interesting. I had not heard about the retirement stuff
Yeah.
before the game, and then Rodney Harrison just kind of drops it in the pregame. And
You
then,
know.
yeah, no big deal. And then it was talked about before, a little before the game by like Michelle Tafoya on the sideline, and it's like, was this like, did people talk about this before? Like, did it just like spawn?
Yeah.
And now he's like potentially retiring. So none of that with Marchand that we know of. So he'll be around for quite a bit. But again, it kind of hits at this, like, you need both. And, I don't think that, let's say Bergeron does retire after the season. What do you have with Marchand? Like, Marchand's a great play driver, same with Pasternak, but you need that legit number one center, and you don't have it. You do not have it outside of Bergeron. So It comes down to, again, that's why this deadline could be one of the most important that the Bruins have had in years, which we say every year, but I really mean it this year.
Yes.
This could have a
Well,
lot of
fast
long
forward
term
to
ramifications.
2023, it would be the same thing. But honestly, considering what the window is, yeah, every year going forward, it's probably going to be more important in terms of charting out the future because we've said it before. I don't think this team is going to sell or are they going to completely blow things up. And again, I think you look at the state of this team. Can you really blow things up completely anyway? Like there's people who talk about they should just trade everyone and all of a sudden get into the sweepstakes for the Connor Bedard sweepstakes. Like no, like I think the floor of this team is also too high that even if you like Bergeron retires and you try to sell off tradable assets like DeBrusk, Craig Smith, all these other guys, you're still not at that tier where you're hovering with Montreal and Arizona, where you're going to have a viable chance. Maybe you get the number 9 overall pick 2-3 years in a row, but that's not guaranteed success, right? Like if you still have McAvoy and Pasta and Swayman and these other guys, you've got a pretty good, like at least skeleton of a team that you can build for going forward. So it's all about finding that next kind of piece for Bergeron that doesn't extend this contention window, but at least bridges that gap between what I think you're looking for between these kind of different groups within this Bruins roster.
Think of it like this: if you gave Montreal or Arizona or any of those teams the chance to build around a core like Pasternak, McAvoy, Swayman, even good Coyle going forward, they would choose that over what they're currently
Yeah.
going through.
Yes.
And I think people kind of have to understand that. Um, speaking of top six centers, Jack Studnicka is in the lineup again, but he's not really getting top 6 minutes. Not really getting top 6 minutes. And this feels like a time when maybe you could see what you got in a guy like him. Is it telling that that he's not getting those top 6 minutes? You think Don Sweeney's kind of like, come on, Bruce, like let's get him propped up here for the deadline.
Yeah, I mean it's definitely not ideal. I think when you look at Bruce Cassidy and the Bruins thinking, I could also see the situation where they're looking at, especially that Coyle, Frederick, Smith line, and they view that as a potential third line going forward once everyone's back healthy, and they want to see how they do and with more offensive zone time. So that's why they're kind of the de facto 2C. So at the very least, it's good that Sadiq is not just in like a checking line role, even though he's with,
Yeah.
at least he has like DeBrusk on that line. I don't know how DeBrusk, Danica, Foligno kind of mesh as a line. So at least like he's the 3C and not like a 4C where he's getting 8 minutes a night, what have you. But you look at kind of the Bruins where they've mapped out that top 6 right now without Bergeron, where I don't think they're going to touch the Eric Hollow line, even though they haven't really produced over the last couple of games. But if you want to see what you got with that Coyle, Frederick, Smith line and build that going forward, I could see the rationale there. And again, they were great on Saturday. I mean, they kind of set the tone with that first shift where they could have beat Matt Murray like 2-3 times before Frederick finally scored on that second chance puck. So, again, not ideal in terms of you. Of course, you'd like to see Sadiq up here in a top 6 role, and he has 3 points in 2 games, and the stock's going back up. And I mean, you've seen it with how many other young players that have come up from Providence between Zaboral and Vakanainen and all these guys that have kind of raised their value across the league over the last couple of months, but haven't seen it yet from Stanika. He had a few, he was one of the few maybe bright points in that game against the Hurricanes. He prevented that goal, I think, on the PK. So he's not like taking himself out of the game, but I also haven't really noticed him. So is that a byproduct of the line he's on? Is it just the minutes he's getting, the role that they've kind of mapped out for him? He's kind of in that kind of limbo you're in right now, right? Where you don't really know what exactly is the best fit for him, where he maps out as an NHLer. Yeah, is he like an offensive first guy? Is he like a Ryan Spooner, or are they trying to mold him into more of a two-way kind of guy where it maybe doesn't fit his skill set? So it's tough to really map out where exactly he fits into this team, both now and going forward. But if you look at just the way they've mapped out that top 6, I could see why they want to give that Coil line more reps going forward. Because one, it's intriguing, and two, if it gets Coyle engaged, if it gets Frederick engaged, which he was in that game, and it gives you a legit third line. We saw how important that is going forward for the 2019 Bruins, how well that third line anchored them there. So if you're trying to find any kind of silver linings out of without Bergeron in the lineup and it gives you this third line combination that's really gelling, they'll take it.
You think this third line, the way it's if they can really find something with Frederick Coyle and Smith, and all indications point to they'd probably do have something there. You think that kind of says, hey, maybe we don't need to go out and get a second line center at the deadline. Maybe instead we just need a right winger. So a guy like a Conor Garland, might cost a little less than what a center would cost, and then your top, your first three lines are Marchand, Bergeron, said winger, or Oscar Steen, as you predicted, and then
Mhm.
you have your second line of Hall, Haula, and Pasternak. Then you get your third line of Frederick, Coyle, and Smith. If they can find a right wing for that top line, does that change kind of their deadline strategy?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good pivot if that's what they're. I still think they obviously want to acquire a center, but again, I think a lot of that's going to dictate what's going to dictate that is one, what the price is and who's even available. Because I think you've seen over the last few weeks now the narrative shift with JT Miller, especially where it's like, I don't think they're going to move him. Like, or you see a lot of the chatter of, oh, they don't really have to move him now. He's still, got one more year left on his deal, so they'll see what they have. So I don't know if Miller's getting dealt. The Hurdle situation is interesting because their acting GM over a few days ago is pretty much saying, "Oh, we want him here long term. He wants to be here long term." And then like a day later, Hurdle talked and was like, "Yeah, I'm keeping my options open." Like not really going along with that of like I'm going to get paid this summer. So I mean, who knows if those guys are off the board and it comes down to whether or not you want to get into a bidding war with the Avalanche for Giroux, for a guy that's not part of your long term plans. Maybe then you pivot and then get a Garland, as you said, and you roll with that as your, a more balanced forward core for this year. And then who knows, maybe next year, if Bergeron, if Bergeron's still on board, then you do go into you try to get a bidding war for Hurdle in the offseason, what have you. Like, there's other ways they can kind of build off of it. So it's definitely a good way to pivot if the Bruins don't really have a legit guy down the middle that they can acquire at the deadline. I think that's what I don't think like Garland is the number one target, but if you got to switch gears and the guys you want aren't there, there's at least other ways you can improve this roster by targeting other areas of that forward core.
It's kind of sounds like a worst case scenario in a sense. It's not near the top of things they want to do. I think it's just going
Yeah.
to be kind of like, oh, if these first couple plans don't work, we'll go for a top six right winger like a Connor Garland.
Yeah. Worst case scenario is
Speaking
they
of
get like Lee Stepniak or something like that. Like
yes,
Conor Garland's still a good player, but
yes,
it's not that
they
that puts
fully
him over the
Stepniak
top.
out.
Yeah.
They rebring the graphic. The Petrov
Petrov
McGuire's
McGuire,
likeness.
yeah, Petrov McGuire will be happy. He'll be the only person happy about Lee Stepniak
Yeah,
coming back.
and Brian Giunta.
Yes, of
Just bring back
course.
the old days. Just get everybody going. Speaking of trade pieces, we'll kind of hit on this quickly. Jake DeBrusk, still with the Bruins, has not spoken to the media since obviously his trade request back in late November, which now obviously like he's been in there forever. They've needed him with these injuries
Yeah.
and suspensions, so it's not like he's just kind of taking up space. He is playing. But I found something interesting. Fluto Shinzawa, the Athletic, ranked his 15 pieces that could move before the deadline for the Bruins, and DeBrusk was 14 out of 15. And I feel like that's dropped. Granted, I don't think Fluto made a list of 15 back like in November when DeBrusk might have
Right.
been higher. But DeBrusk is 14, and he's behind Trevor Kuntar and Jacob Lauko and Oscar Steen and Johnny Beecher and some of these other guys. And it feels like DeBrusk might be a little higher than that, just because he's in the NHL. He's shown that potential before. They know he wants out. I'm kind of surprised to see him down that low.
Yeah. I mean, maybe it's just the fact that the Bruins don't have really any leverage and they don't want to bite on a deal. They are getting pennies on the dollar for a guy that, as I think we've said before, I would not be surprised if Russ goes somewhere else and scores 20 goals or scores like 10 goals in the final like 25 games of the season. Would not surprise, I think,
Pulls
any
like a
of us.
Manny Ramirez when he went to LA, like that for
Hit
that
like
half season.
480, like casual. Yeah, exactly. Manny would. Um,
And he would.
so again, I think maybe some of that's also the leverage of what the price is. Again, you're seeing guys like Toffoli go for first prospect and multiple picks. Like you have to wonder like what the actual market is for DeBrusk and whether they're just waiting it out for more teams to get desperate. I still think he gets dealt at some point in the deadline. You hope that eventually the roster kind of settles out because it seems like every time like DeBrusk gets into a bit of a groove here, or you could see the momentum of maybe he gets dealt, an injury pops up where they desperately need him in the lineup, what have you. So hopefully that kind of stabilizes a little bit. But I have to imagine he gets moved. It's just I think what the Bruins are willing to bite the bullet on in terms of return. Because if it's a third and fourth round pick. Of course, they're not going to do that. They want a 1-for-1 swap or a first or a second or something like that, right? For a guy that I think everyone's well aware is probably going to do pretty well going forward in his career. So I think it's more or less a waiting game than anything.
Yeah. Waiting for Jake DeBrusk to get traded. We'll be 100 years old by the time that
Yes.
happens. Anyways, Connor, thank you for obviously joining. Before you go, what can the people look forward to over at BSJ?
Yeah, we'll continue to evaluate other trade scenarios for the Bruins. Again, it seems like every couple of days is a new name tossed out there that's shocking the Bruins are linked to. I will be in New York City for the games on
Ooh.
at Madison Square Garden and UBS Arena, checking out their new digs over there in Belmont Park. So I'll be down there for that. Working on a
Where?
couple of features.
Belmont where?
Park, Evan.
Park?
So I'll be down there for that. So I have all that stuff over at BSJ. So subscribe to BostonSportsJournal.com. Want to follow me on Twitter? You can do that at ConorRyan_93.
Go do all that for CLNS Media. I'm Evan Marinofsky. You Bruins Beat listeners. Have a great rest.